Claire Morgan thought she was ready to become a mother. At 29, with her husband Daniel working long hours and a quiet house all to herself, she believed the hardest part would be the waiting. But from the very first night she felt movement inside her. She knew something wasn't right. The doctors said everything was normal, but Claire couldn't shake the feeling that what was growing in her womb wasn't a child at all. Soon her body would become a battleground, her home a prison, and her reflection a stranger. This is the story of a pregnancy that should have brought life, but instead delivered horror. I always imagined that pregnancy would be a gentle and beautiful experience, filled with soft mornings, quiet joy, and the thrill of waiting for a new life to arrive. That was what everyone told me. They said it would be magical, that I would glow, that I would feel connected to something bigger than myself. But from the very beginning, something inside me felt off. I tried to push it away, convincing myself it was just nerves, just the fear of change. But no matter how much I smiled for others, I couldn't escape the growing sense of dread that clung to me. At first, it was the dreams. I would wake in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, my heart racing as if I had been running for hours. The same shadowy figure appeared night after night, crouching near the foot of my bed. It never moved, never spoke, yet I could feel it staring at me, its presence heavy and suffocating. Sometimes it leaned closer, so close I swore I could feel the weight of its breath on my skin. Even though when I opened my eyes, the room was still and empty, I told myself they were just dreams, my mind overreacting to the hormones, but the feeling stayed long after I woke. The sickness came next. Everyone around me laughed gently, told me it was normal, but what I felt wasn't normal. The nausea didn't come and go. It lived inside me, rising in violent waves that bent me double and left my body trembling. No amount of bland food or rest helped. I threw up until my throat burned and my stomach ached. Yet even after I emptied myself, I felt restless, as though something inside me was still unsatisfied. I craved things I couldn't explain, raw meat that I would find myself staring at in the grocery store, my mouth watering, or ice from the freezer that I would chew until my gums split open. Dirt tempted me too, the smell of it after rain so overwhelming that I had to fight the urge to scoop it up with my hands. I didn't tell anyone, how could I? But it was the movement that frightened me the most. Everyone said the first flutters would feel like butterflies, soft and magical. What I felt was sharp, jarring, almost violent. It didn't feel like a baby shifting, it felt like something clawing. At first I convinced myself it was just stronger than usual, but as the weeks passed, the movements grew more deliberate. One evening, as I lay on my back, my hand resting lightly over my stomach, I felt a sudden push, not a kick, not a roll, a solid press, as though fingers were bracing against my skin, testing the barrier between us. I gasped, my heart thundering in my chest. The pressure grew, and I saw a handprint forming beneath the surface of my skin. It stayed there for a moment, each finger long, stretched too far, before slowly fading back inside. I wanted to scream, to run, but I couldn't. I sat there frozen, staring at the faint outlines of where the fingers had been. I told myself my mind was playing tricks, that it was just a shadow, just the light, but deep down, I knew the truth. That was no ordinary kick, that was intent. That night, I barely slept. When I finally drifted off, I dreamt of the shadow again. This time it wasn't at the foot of my bed. It was closer, crouched right beside me, its face hidden in darkness. My belly felt heavy in the dream, and I realized with growing terror that the shadow's hand was resting on it, stroking it slowly as if claiming it. It whispered words I couldn't understand, low and guttural, but I knew it wasn't speaking to me. It was speaking to whatever was inside me. I woke up choking on a scream, tears already streaming down my face. My hand flew to my stomach, and I felt the heat radiating from within, like a fever burning beneath my skin. When I turned on the lamp, the room was empty. The shadows looked ordinary again, but as I pulled my shirt up and stared down, I saw them clearly, 5 dark finger-shaped bruises blooming across my stomach, pressed from the inside out. I tried to tell myself that the marks were nothing more than broken blood vessels, some strange reaction my body was having, but even as I covered them with loose clothing, I couldn't ignore what I knew deep down. Those weren't natural bruises. They looked like something had pressed against me with force, as if testing how far my skin could stretch. I avoided mirrors, avoided questions, avoided looking too long at myself because I was afraid of what else I might see. The doctor's appointments became unbearable. I would lie back on the table as the cold gel smeared across my belly, the screen flickering to life with a grainy image of what should have been my child. Each time, the doctor's expression shifted slightly. Their smiles felt forced, their words rehearsed. They told me everything looked fine, that my baby was healthy, but their eyes kept darting to the screen, whispering to each other before quickly changing the subject. Once, I swore I heard one of them murmur the word abnormality under their breath, only to cough and pretend they hadn't spoken at all. I left the office shaking, more confused than comforted. At night, the scratching began. At first it was faint, like the brushing of fingertips on fabric, but as the days passed it grew louder, deeper, until I realized it wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from within me. The sound echoed through my bones, like claws dragging against the inside of my body. I pressed my hands against my stomach, desperate to make it stop, but the scratching only grew more frantic, almost angry, as though it resented being touched. I stopped being able to sleep. Even when my eyes closed, the noise continued, gnawing at my mind until I thought I might lose it completely. Sometimes, I would muffle the sound by pressing a pillow over my stomach, but then I could feel the thing inside pushing back against the pressure, as though it knew what I was trying to do. The mirror became my enemy. My skin was pale, my eyes hollow, and I barely recognized myself anymore. But what terrified me most were the shapes I caught in the glass when I wasn't looking directly at it. If I glanced too quickly, I saw something behind me, a tall, distorted figure, its face hidden, its body bent unnaturally. It never moved when I turned around. But when I looked back at the mirror, it was closer. Every day, closer. One evening as I sat on the edge of my bed, exhausted and trembling, I felt a sudden jolt in my stomach. Not like a kick, but like something twisting, snapping, reshaping itself inside me. The pain was so sharp I nearly collapsed. My skin stretched in grotesque ways, bulging out at angles that made no sense. I clutched my belly, sobbing, begging it to stop, but the movement only grew more violent, pushing outward in sharp, deliberate bursts. Then I noticed a pattern. It wasn't random. The bulges appeared in sequences, sharp and repetitive, like strokes being drawn on a canvas. I lay back, horrified, as my own body became the surface for something else's message. It pressed and shifted until I realized with dawning terror that it was forming shapes, letters, words. I stared down at the distorted skin, and though the letters were jagged and incomplete, I could read them. My mind filled in what my eyes could barely comprehend. It was spelling something. I scrambled for the light, desperate to erase the thought, to convince myself I was wrong. But when I flicked the lamp on and looked back down, the last shape pressed hard against me, sharp enough to make me cry out in pain. I watched, helpless, as the skin of my stomach stretched and released, until the final word was clear enough to leave no doubt. It wasn't a word a child should ever know. It wasn't even a word spoken out loud, yet it thundered inside my skull all the same. It said, mine. I didn't leave the house anymore. The idea of being outside, surrounded by people who might notice something was wrong with me, filled me with a suffocating panic. My world shrank down to the walls of my bedroom, the bathroom, and the shadows that seemed to creep closer every day. The curtains stayed drawn, the lights stayed dim, and I stayed hidden, clutching my stomach, as though I could keep the horror inside me from spilling out. The movements became constant. It wasn't the gentle rolling or soft kicks I'd read about in books and heard about from other mothers. What I felt was deliberate. I would lie in bed and place my hand lightly on my belly, and without fail, something inside would press back, not weakly, not softly. It pressed with strength, with intent, with awareness. The pressure was hard enough to make me gasp, hard enough to bruise. I could feel fingers pushing against my palm, not small or delicate but long and rigid, like the skeletal hand of something that should not exist. That was when the whispers started. At first I thought it was my imagination, a trick of exhaustion, but soon they became impossible to ignore. Low, muffled voices echoed from inside me, like someone speaking through walls of flesh. The sounds were guttural, broken, in a language I couldn't recognize. And yet, in some deep, instinctive part of myself, I understood. The words weren't meant for me, not exactly. They were conversations, commands, promises whispered to the thing growing inside me. Every time the whispers came, my skin prickled with cold, and the movements inside grew stronger as though it was listening and responding. I started losing time. I would wake up in different places, with no memory of how I had gotten there. Once, I found myself sitting in the bathtub, the water running cold around my legs, though I didn't remember turning the faucet on. Another time, I woke to find dirt under my fingernails. Fresh soil smeared across my sheets as though I had been digging. My body was no longer fully mine, and the thought sent shivers through me that no blanket could warm. The mirror called to me again. Despite everything in me screaming not to look, I found myself standing in front of it, staring at the reflection of someone I barely recognized. My skin was stretched tight and pale, my eyes ringed in shadows, and my lips were cracked from days without food. But it wasn't me that terrified me most, it was the movement beneath my skin. My stomach bulged and twisted, and then, slowly, unmistakably, a face pressed outward. The features distorted my skin, hollow eyes blinking beneath the surface, a nose pushing forward, and then a mouth stretching wide. My breath caught in my throat as I watched it open, wide enough to scream. A sound erupted from within me, muffled and warped, a scream so raw it vibrated through my body. I collapsed onto the bathroom floor, clutching my stomach, sobbing as the sound echoed around the room, bouncing off the walls until I thought I would shatter with it. When I opened my eyes, the mirror was cracked, spiderweb fractures spreading outward as though something had tried to break through it. My stomach was still again, quiet, as if nothing had ever happened. I pulled myself up slowly, trembling, and that's when I saw the writing. The cracks in the mirror weren't random. They formed lines, jagged strokes that came together in a single shape. My mind resisted it at first, trying to tell me it was just glass, just damage, but the longer I stared, the clearer it became. A word carved into the reflection itself. I leaned closer, my body shaking, my breath fogging the glass, and though the word was written in a language I had never seen before, my mind translated it instantly, perfectly, as though it had been waiting inside me all along. It said, "Soon." The silence that followed the message in the mirror was worse than the noise. For a few days, everything inside me grew still, almost calm, as though it were resting or waiting. But that waiting carried a weight I couldn't bear. Every second felt like standing on the edge of a cliff, knowing the ground beneath me was crumbling. I barely moved from my bed, afraid that if I made the wrong motion, it would stir again. But no matter how still I sat, I could feel its awareness pressing against me, a constant reminder that I was not alone. When it finally returned, it didn't creep back in with whispers or scratches. It came all at once, violent and undeniable. I woke in the middle of the night with a scream caught in my throat, my stomach stretched so far I thought my skin would split open. The bulges moved in jagged rhythms, sharp enough to make my ribs creak, each push deliberate, as though it was forcing my body to rearrange itself. The air in the room grew heavy, thick, almost wet, and I could hear the faint drip of liquid even though nothing was leaking. I tried to call the doctor again, desperate, but the moment I said the word pregnancy, the line went dead. Static hissed in my ear until it warped into something else low, distorted voices whispering directly into the receiver. I threw the phone away, my heart racing, but even after it hit the floor, I could still hear the voices, crawling into the corners of my mind. I turned to the internet next, hoping to find answers, anything that could explain what was happening. I typed in my symptoms: bruising, scratching noises, unnatural movements, but every search ended the same way. The screen flickered, the text dissolved, and strange phrases appeared instead. Sometimes it was only a single command, "Let it be born." Other times it was a warning, "Do not resist." The last time I tried, the words appeared slowly, letter by letter, as though something was typing directly to me. "It is chosen." After that, I stopped trying. Food became impossible. Everything I ate came back up, leaving me weaker by the day. But despite my emptiness, despite the hollowness of my body, my stomach swelled larger, harder, as though it didn't need me at all. At night, I heard the shifting inside me, bones cracking, joints popping, the sound of something too large trying to fold itself into a space too small. I pressed my hands over my ears, but I couldn't block it out. The noise came from within, vibrating through my own bones. Sleep offered no comfort. Each time I closed my eyes, I was pulled into visions I didn't want to see. A crib soaked in blood, a rocking chair that moved without anyone touching it, a lullaby sung in reverse, the melody sharp and broken, echoing in the dark. I woke each morning to find the sheets beneath me stained, not with sweat, not with water, but with something thick and dark, spreading wider each night. No matter how often I washed them, the stains returned, growing stronger, as though they were never meant to be removed. On the 7th night, I woke to silence again. My stomach was still, the whispers gone, the scratching quiet. For a moment I thought it was over, that maybe I had imagined it all. I sat up in bed, my hands trembling as they touched the surface of my skin, waiting for the familiar push. Nothing, just stillness. But then I heard it. Not the faint, muffled whispers I had grown used to, but a clear voice, sharp and deliberate, echoing from inside me. The sound froze my blood. It wasn't my voice. It wasn't the voice of a child. It was deep, old, and cruel, each word vibrating through my body, as though it had taken root in my bones. It said, "I'm ready." The pain started suddenly, sharp enough to tear a scream from my throat, before I could even breathe. My entire body convulsed, dragging me from the bed to the floor where I curled and shook, clutching my stomach. It wasn't like the contractions I had read about, not rhythmic or bearable. It was a searing, relentless pressure, as though something inside me was clawing its way out, desperate to escape. The walls of the room pulsed with each wave, their shadows stretching and twisting, until they no longer looked like shadows at all. The ceiling light flickered wildly, bathing everything in flashes of white and black, and in those moments of darkness, I swore I saw the room shifting. The floorboards looked like veins, pulsing with blood. The air thickened, heavy and wet, filling my lungs with something sour that made me gag. I tried crawling toward the phone, but my body wouldn't obey. Every time I moved, the thing inside me pulled tighter, rooting me to the floor as though it refused to let me go. My stomach bulged violently, the skin stretching so far I could see the outlines of bones pressing against it, shifting unnaturally, breaking and resetting themselves just to fit. I clawed at my skin, tears blinding me, but there was no relief. It wasn't trying to be born. It was trying to break free. My vision blurred, and through the haze I caught sight of the mirror across the room, its cracked surface glinting in the flickering light. My reflection didn't match my movements. I was collapsed on the floor, writhing, but in the mirror I stood perfectly still, pale, calm, almost serene. My reflection lifted its arms slowly, cradling something invisible against its chest, and then I realized with horror that it wasn't invisible at all. The reflection was holding something pale and writhing, its limbs thin and too long, its body twitching as it nestled closer to her chest. I screamed, though no sound escaped me, and when my reflection finally looked up, she smiled. That smile was worse than any nightmare. It wasn't my smile, it was too wide, too knowing, stretching her face into something that didn't belong to me anymore. The pain inside me reached its peak, tearing through me like fire. My stomach collapsed inward suddenly, leaving me hollow, empty, gasping for air. I pressed my hands against myself, but there was nothing there anymore. No kicking, no scratching, no whispers. Just silence. For one trembling moment, I thought maybe it had been a delusion, that the horror was only in my mind. But then I heard it, the faint sound of breathing, not my own, not human, slow and deliberate, coming from across the room. My head turned toward the crib I had prepared weeks ago. It had sat untouched all this time, collecting dust in the corner, a symbol of something normal I had once hoped for. But now, it wasn't empty. Something lay inside, small but not fragile, pale but not human. Its chest rose and fell with steady breaths, its body twitching in strange jerky motions, as though it was adjusting to its new shape. I wanted to crawl away, but my limbs felt heavy, useless, as if drained of all strength. My eyes locked on the crib as the creature stirred, its head lifting slowly until its face came into view. The sight froze me completely. Its eyes snapped open, wide and black, endless voids that swallowed every flicker of light. They fixed on me instantly, unblinking, too aware, too knowing, and then it smiled. The same wide, unnatural smile I had seen in the mirror. The silence stretched until it felt like the room itself had stopped breathing. My body shook violently, my heart slamming against my ribs, but I couldn't look away. Somewhere deep inside me, I realized the truth, one so cold it made my soul ache. I had never been its mother. I had only been the doorway, the vessel it needed to enter this world. I wanted to scream, to beg, to pray, but before I could even form the words, the crib began to rock on its own, slowly, rhythmically, as though soothed by an invisible hand. The sound of wood creaking filled the room, echoing in time with the faint hum of something that almost sounded like a lullaby. And as I lay there, paralyzed, I realized the lullaby wasn't coming from the crib at all. It was coming from me. My lips moved on their own, humming a melody I had never learned, my voice low and trembling as though some unseen force had taken control. The thing in the crib closed its eyes again, still smiling, as though comforted by the song it had forced me to sing. And in that moment, I knew the nightmare was only beginning.